Can I ask everybody to take your seats, our panelists to take their places at the panel, and we're ready to start. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now ready to start our high-level panel discussion addressing the challenges of preventing conflicts and tackling ongoing ones and identifying transformative strategies for promoting inclusive peace building and post-conflict rebuilding. Allow me to introduce our first panelist. She is South Africa's Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ms. Mashego Dlamini. Welcome. Welcome. Now, as co-chair this year of the WPS Focal Points Network, alongside Switzerland, one of South Africa's priorities is to champion women's participation in mediation and negotiation. Ms. Mashego Dlamini, how has your country promoted action on this work in formal processes while engaging civil society?
Thank you very much, Facilitator. Her Excellency Lively, State Secretary Federal of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Switzerland. Her Excellency Pramila Patten, Special Representatives of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, United Nations. Her Excellency Madam Beneta Diop, Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, African Union. His Excellency Mr. Simon Gedenbilder, Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, Assistant State Secretary, Switzerland. The National Focal Point on Women, Peace and Security, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Juliet, the facilitator of the high-level engagement, please allow me to congratulate the esteemed government of Switzerland for hosting this important meeting and the hospitality that is extended to all delegates present here for these 2 days. South Africa is excited to be a member of the global network of National Focal Point on Women, Peace and Security. The membership commenced from its launch. The country's excitement was expressed by being among the first group of member states to appoint and set representatives to attend and participate actively in the network. Facilitator, please allow me to express how delighted we as South Africans are to a co-chair of the Global Network on National Focal Point on Women, Peace and Security, as well as now physically co-chair the 4th capital level meeting here in Geneva, Switzerland. The Republic of South Africa co-chaired this important meeting at a time when the relevance of the theme of the high-level session implements the Women, Peace and Security agenda through multi-stakeholder action is more strategic than ever before for the Women, Peace and Security agenda. The global tension and numerous conflicts we see around the world today demonstrate the unequal impact of any type of conflict on women, children, and the youth. What strongly becomes evident is the disproportionate impact on women fleeing conflict areas, clutching children and their scarce belongings, trying to help the old and needy, moving swiftly, looking for refugee. This is devastating sight and need urgent attention. As I watched these images, it was all too apparent to me that despite the advance of the WPS agenda over the past 22 years, both the policy and practice, more work is required, and undoubtedly strategies must embrace multi-stakeholder action. The 4th level capital meetings, which we are co-chairing, came at the right time. The meeting's theme of multi-stakeholder action for the Women, Peace and Security agenda resonates well and calls for all of us map a way forward that will ensure appropriate intervention to elevate this dire consequence of conflict situation. South Africa as a country is championing the Women, Peace and Security agenda from a global to continental and national level through multi-stakeholder action. At the national level, South Africa adopted UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the National Action Plan in 2020. Adoption came about following multi-stakeholder engagement involving government departments and organs of civil society mobilized under the foundation of human rights, amongst others, and development partners versus UN Women, the government of Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Ireland, and others. Without doubt, South Africa's approach to development and the final adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 has been in close collaboration with multi-stakeholders. Today, as we popularize the NAP, once again, we do so through multi-stakeholder action. At continental level, South Africa is committed to the African Peace and Security Agenda and Vision 2063. During our tenure as the chair of the African Union Commission, under the theme of silencing the guns by 2020, we collaborated with the AU Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security to ensure that the Women, Peace and Security agenda was not left behind. I am glad to see my sister, Madam Bineta Diop, the AU Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security. We collaborate with the AU Office of the Special Envoy to deploy our women experts and ambassadors on solidarity missions to countries in conflict such as Sudan, Mozambique, and others. I should add that during the intense of COVID-19 pandemic period, when working remotely and virtually was the norm, we did not falter all multi-stakeholder action. We did continue using the virtual platform like Zoom and progressing to hybrid format as we are doing our work. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mashego Dlamini. I would like to now bring into the discussion our next panelist. She's the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Ms. Pramila Patten. Welcome. Now, this year's annual report of the UN Secretary General on conflict-related sexual violence highlights the need to prioritize accountability as a deterrent to crimes of sexual violence. Now, we'd like to know what progress have we made in this regard, and how can multi-stakeholder action work in practice to address impunity?
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. I would really like to thank you for highlighting the issue of accountability as a form of deterrence, and also allow me at the outset to warmly commend the initiative of Switzerland and South Africa for co-chairing this very important frame network, which is a sign of hope and unity at a harrowing moment for humanity. Conflict-related sexual violence has been called the world's least condemned crime. And against this backdrop, the central challenge that I face in executing my mandate is in terms of identifying ways to convert the vicious cycle of violence, impunity, and revenge into a virtuous cycle of reporting, resourcing, and response, including in terms of timely, accessible service delivery, justice, and reparations. And I just want to stress that unpunished crime is repeated crime. And that is why every new wave of warfare brings with it a rising tide of sexual violence from Myanmar to South Sudan, Tigray and Ukraine. What I'm seeing on the ground is that justice and accountability remains the rare exception, and impunity is the norm. And why the report spells out this need for accountability is that the report, which was debated before the Security Council last month, and which documents some 3,300 UN verified cases, which I must signal is very much sexual violence is chronically underreported, and with COVID-related restrictions, these were the only numbers that the UN could verify with very high threshold, and that every single of these cases cry out for justice, and yet of the thousands of confirmed cases that we have been able to document, we see annually just 3 or 4 corresponding convictions. That's where we are. And what we are also seeing is that sexual violence is being used increasingly not only as a weapon of war, but also as a tactic of terrorism, as a tool of political repression, as we see it in Sudan, in Myanmar, and in other places. And yet you mentioned progress. Yes, we have made huge progress at the normative framework, because after Security Council Resolution 1888, which establishes my mandate, we have had at least 6 dedicated resolutions of the Security Council on conflict-related sexual violence, with the latest one adopted in 2019, Resolution 2467, which is very comprehensive. So the gap is really in terms of compliance. How do we turn commitments into compliance? How do we convert resolutions into solutions? In terms of progress, there are some landmark cases which, due to the work of my office, my small team of experts on the rule of law, that we have been able to achieve. But these remain exceptions. I mean, for example, these are landmark transitional justice developments that we have seen for the period of 2021, from which I think the international community can draw lessons and inspiration. Firstly, Guatemala, 5 former members of a notorious paramilitary group were convicted and sentenced for crimes of sexual violence committed against indigenous Maya Achi women in the 1980s. Then we saw how in Iraq, the Council of Representatives adopted the Yazidi Survivors Law, which paves the way for support and reparations to victims of Daesh atrocities, including rape and sexual slavery. And you should know that justice and reparations are what victims ask the most and receive the least. We also saw how the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruled that the state bore responsibility for violations of the rights of Colombian journalist Ginette Bedoya Lima, who was abducted and sexually abused during the civil war. We also saw a former official from the Syrian General Intelligence Service who was convicted by the higher regional court in Koblenz, Germany, acting pursuant to the principle of universal jurisdiction for crimes against humanity, including sexual violence committed in 2011 and 2012. So these examples illustrate the importance of supporting victims' associations and enacting legislative reform at the national level, the role of courts reinforcing state responsibility, and the impact of third states taking action on the basis of universal jurisdiction to ensure that justice delayed is not ultimately justice denied. And this also illustrates the importance of bringing all tools to bear to combat impunity. In terms of roadmap for multi-stakeholder action, I would like to make like 5 key recommendations. First, coordinated diplomatic engagement to address sexual violence in ceasefire and peace agreements. Secondly, using early warning indicators of sexual violence to inform monitoring, threat analysis, and early response. Thirdly, the importance of leveraging the credible threat of sanctions to curtail the flow of arms and resources to perpetrators and spoilers to the peace, to incentivize compliance and corrective action. Fourth, gender responsive justice and security sector reform, including vetting, training, gender balance, and oversight. And last but not least, amplifying the voices of survivors in decision-making processes and safeguarding the women's rights defenders who act on them. Because it is starkly evident across the war zones of the world that lawlessness is tantamount to license to rape. And prevention is the best form of protection. And as stakeholders in this agenda, I think we must join hands and join forces across our respective sectors and spheres of influence, and none of us can rest until every woman and every girl can sleep under the cover of justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Patton. Thank you. Powerful words on a very devastating topic. Now I'd like to hear from our African Union Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, Madame Bineta Diop. Welcome. In the context of preventing and addressing insecurity, which best practices can we draw from to inform how regional organizations can strengthen engagement with member states and civil society to promote women's meaningful participation in peace and crisis responses at regional, at a national, and at a local level? Madame Diop.
Thank you so much, Juliet. And let me stand on the existing protocol. Thank the co-chair, Switzerland and South Africa, together with UN Women, for bringing us together. You know, after the COVID pandemic, we have met in Africa soil in Namibia. We could not meet in Canada, but we are very happy to be here today, and we thank the organizer. First, let me emphasize that the African Union, being our continental policy organs, you know, have the right normative. And I think we are not here to talk about the right normative, but it's great that we have the Africa governance architecture, if you don't know it, you know, which is very, and the one which is dealing with governance, peace and security as well. We have also created other, you know, through what Madam Minister have said, you know, the Peace Fund, but also the Silencing the Gun program. So the normative and programs are there. But your question is, how do we make sure that we implement, how do we transform that policy into action? So let me just start by saying we have looked into an innovative way of implementing, and you will know why Africa, being a continent that have been so much exposed in conflict, you name them, from Liberia, Sierra Leone war, we get into the region of Great Lakes and others. So the continent which have experienced, now we see so many conflicts going on in Ukraine and others. So we are not the only one, but we took, you know, innovative way and engagement, and this is the work of civil society together with our government. It's not government alone. So let me just, because the impact, the real impact of conflict on women have been so obvious that we could not ignore. So the innovative way, number one is maybe to make sure that the African Union have a special envoy on women, peace and security. The one to represent the voice of the voiceless. I'm not saying I'm the only one, but I'm saying since African Union was the first to do it, now we have seen so many countries, including Canada and others, to have a representative on women, peace and security. That's very innovative. That's the first one. We need to note that, but it was Africa who started first. The number two, and I will not dwell on my mandate, but we have seen Madam Minister Dlamini have also, Mashego Dlamini have also mentioned our mission, solidarity mission in the field, and I will come back to that. But number two was also to create innovative platform, because what we hear all the time is, where are the women to be at negotiating table? And the first one we did was to make sure that we create a network, a platform of women that have been well-trained, and we have women here in the room that are representing FemWise, but also we have centers of excellence like Accord and Kofi Annan that are training the women mediators. So we were the first one in Africa to create that platform of women mediators. Now you can tell me, even I was listening to Switzerland today, they said that model now is in Switzerland, but in many other places right now. So it means that we are looking into innovative way of bringing those kind of platforms. The second platform we create is the African Women Leaders Network, because at the end of the day is when we look at governance, we need to make sure that women are at the core of the governance architecture in everywhere, not just in the African Union. Either it is in the diplomatic corps, that's why we are here with the focal point, but everywhere in the government. It's good to have women leaders at each point. And with our support of Germany, we have the focal point and national chapters in each country. We have 27 right now. So let me just say, how do we engage with civil society by having those platforms? For first, as I said, we have created this solidarity to the field, going to the women themselves. Madam Minister have also mentioned our mission to, for example, to Mali, even during the crisis, we reach out to the women of Mali, where I see Mama Kwete here, to solidarity, to be with them, to say, yes, you are in crisis, what can we do to help you women to get together as one voice, but to influence, for example, looking into your constitution reform, looking into your electoral law, etc. So we reach out to the women and we support them to be addressing their own government. The other issue that we did is open session. My sister here, Pramila, came to Addis to address the Peace and Security Council. So we have regular open session where we invite not just the United Nations, our partner, but we invite also the women that are on the ground to talk about the violence against women, to talk about the impact that having the refugee, the humanitarian as well. So we open that space and link it at the end of the day to the Security Council in New York. So that is how, and looking in the situation of women and girls. So maybe I will also touch on something that is Pramila have talked about, is the accountability mechanism. Because it's not just having the framework, but what we need also is to measure progress. And measuring progress, of course, it lies on our government because they are the first one at the front to implement. But how do we make sure that civil society are part of it? What we did is bringing group of experts, including the military, including government representative, our Ministry of Gender, Foreign Affairs together to work on an instrument which we call the Continental Result Framework with 41 indicators. And we wanted those indicators to be friendly, looking into the 4 pillars of 1325. Either it is participation, protection, prevention, and post-conflict recovery. So what we're doing now is to work with our member state to report annually, because we need to be accountable. Of course, it's a process. It just started. We have issued a second report of the chairperson of the African Union, and that report is also being presented to the Security Council in New York to share with the global arena to see the progress that we are making in Africa. So that is, again, very innovative, because they are the member states, including civil society at country level, that are measuring the progress like we do on CEDAW to see what progress are we making right now, but what are also the challenges that we are facing, and what are the plans that we have to address this. So this is the lie in the office of the special envoy, being the advocate, but making sure also accountability mechanism is there that we can respond to that. So I think I will stop there, but those mechanisms are ongoing. It will be good we share with the global to see who wanted also to see how Africa, what is the second report of the chairperson and what are the gaps. We can look up on those gaps. And I think Pramila have talked about some of those gaps. Violence against women continue to be in many places, especially during COVID, and how can we respond to that? And I think that's why recently we had the conference of men, which is the leader of African Union, have come together to say that no, COVID have seen the silent pandemic, which is violence against women, but especially in conflict zone. So let's make sure that the men, our leaders, our head of state, what we call positive masculinity, have come together to address that and to have a roadmap. So I think we're engaging more and more, but driven also by not just our member state, but civil society. So thank you very much for your first question. Waiting for the second one.
Waiting for the second one. Thank you so much, Madame Diop. Thank you so much. Very innovative. Thank you. Let me bring in our next panelist, our brother. We're all sisters and we've got a brother here. Yes, hello. Ambassador Simon Geisbühler, you are the Assistant State Secretary of the Swiss Foreign Ministry. Welcome. Switzerland is currently implementing its 4th National Action Plan on WPS. It's also a signatory of the Women, Peace and Security Humanitarian Action Compact, reflecting on those experiences in which way can the Women, Peace and Security agenda become more impactful in the daily lives of women peace builders, and in particular with regard to women's participation in peace processes. We really want to hear that.
Thank you so much, Juliette. It's great to be on this panel, and it's fantastic that we can all meet in person. With Pramila, for example, we had 2 calls in the last 1.5 years, but we have never met. We meet for the first time here on this panel. And as you know, I'm deeply convinced by the importance of your mandate and of your work. I'm also very grateful for the participation of Deputy Minister Mashego Dlamini and also the African Union Special Envoy Diop. Deputy Minister, we are honored to have South Africa on our side as a co-chair of the Vocal Point Network. Now to your specific question, allow me to start with a more general observation. Geopolitical tensions are high. With the Russian attack against Ukraine, war is again raging also in Europe. In some ways, this war is a manifestation or maybe a culmination of trends we see since about 20 years. Freedom, democracy, and human rights, women's rights, are under pressure globally. The data is very clear on that. These trends do have effects on women's rights, clearly, and the impacts are mostly negative, unfortunately. We have to rethink how we work on gender issues and on women, peace and security. We have to be innovative, but we also have to be forceful in defending our interests and our values. Let me outline 2 aspects relevant to your question, Juliette. One on peace processes and the other one on national action plans. First, we are reconsidering our understanding of peace processes. Building durable peace is an endeavor that demands the engagement of the society as a whole. Peace processes cannot be exclusively top-down. In official peace negotiations, as well as informal dialogue initiatives, women need to be able to participate fully and meaningfully. Let me give you a concrete example. In the Syrian context, Switzerland joins the UN in pursuing a multi-track approach. We support the Constitutional Committee, which is about to meet again here in Geneva in a couple of days, and in which civil society participates through a dedicated delegation. We support the UN Special Envoy's efforts to consult a broad range of Syrian civil society stakeholders on the wider political process through the so-called Civil Society Support Room. We also engage with mediators within civil society, often women, to diffuse tensions at the local level in Syria, even if the challenges in this regard remain enormous. Second, National action plans on women, peace and security, as well as the compact, are important instruments to mainstream our efforts. They guide us in translating our commitments into tangible and impactful action. And it has been said again and again also on this panel, we do have in fact this gap between the commitments, between plans, but what we really need is concrete action, tangible, measurable action on the ground. In this sense, our work on women, peace and security does not happen in isolation. Since the adoption of our first action plan in Switzerland in 2007, Switzerland has tried to connect the dots in a coherent manner because we consider the National Action Plan as a part of our efforts to build and sustain peace. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Geisbühler. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Ms. Candice Mashego-Lamini. I'd like to ask what avenues of collaboration can be strengthened between countries and civil society of the Global North and the Global South in the Focal Points Network to advance the WPS agenda. Ms. Amini.
Thank you very much, Ms. Juliet. I believe that the past 20 years of the Women, Peace and Security agenda has laid a solid foundation for stakeholder action between the Global South and the Global North. Africa is a diverse continent, and the conflict trend of the past have demonstrated how our civil society mobilize, organize, and advance the Women, Peace and Security agenda. At a capital level, we are convening for the fourth time and have institutionalized this forum for greater collaboration. As a co-chair, South Africa has chosen a civil society partner called Accord to be our official CSO to this forum. The Swiss and South Africa CSOs have met in the margin of this meeting, and I believe that this kind of collaboration should become a permanent feature of the capital meetings. The Women, Peace and Security agenda has high visibility both in Global North and Global South countries. Despite regional variations, many countries have adopted national action plan to promote the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. The CSO Forum can inform the Capital Women's Peace and Security Focal Points meetings and vice versa. And again, towards greater stakeholder action. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now I'm wondering what your advice is, Ms. Pramila Patten. What's your advice regarding abuse survivors? What can members of this network do to provide more support to the survivors of sexual violence in conflict, including marginalized women and girls from minority and indigenous populations, women and girls with disabilities, LGBTQ+ persons, and others?
Thank you. I think first and foremost, it is critical that we recognize that survivors are not a homogeneous group and that they require specialized services and interventions. Our annual reports, for example, demonstrate how intersecting forms of inequality based on ethnic identity, political affiliation, age, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity, socioeconomic and migratory status, among other factors, actually increase the risk faced by diverse individuals in a context of historical power imbalances, which are structural and systemic. So intersectionality brings into focus how various forms of inequality operate together and exacerbate each other. So members of this network can really pave the way in ensuring that an intersectional analysis informs the next generation of national action plans on women, peace, and security, which should include concrete, budgeted, and time-bound activities to support survivors of conflict-related sexual violence and catalyze change. A discernible trend evident also from our annual report is that socioeconomically marginalized women living in areas beyond the reach of rule of law institutions, often in displacement settings, for example, and in communities awash with small arms and light weapons, they are at a greater risk of sexual violence. And we also see that the physical, psychological, and social scars, what they are when they are left untreated, how they compound over time. And we also have to bear in mind that survivors and affected communities know best what they need. And this is what grassroots activists always say, nothing about us without us. And I think this network can make an important contribution in ensuring safe, effective, and meaningful participation of survivors in all policy, but also resource allocation and decision-making processes, including specific outreach to unmute the voices of those who are most marginalized. From the Central African Republic to Yemen, or the refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, survivors of sexual violence are at risk of becoming forgotten victims of forgotten crises. And the bandwidth of the international community is unfortunately limited. But even as the eyes of the world are focused on Ukraine, I really want to stress that we cannot avert our gaze from other entrenched conflicts where the needs of sexual survivors remain unmet. And across the globe, we see how survivors are silenced by trauma, by pain, despair, as compounded by social stigma, insecurity, and the paucity of service provision. So a survivor, I really want to urge a survivor-centered approach, which requires that services are high quality, accessible, timely, and tailored to the specific needs of survivors in all their diversity. And this is what the network can do and can continue to play an important role in mobilizing the resources needed to make that a reality. And it's also a time when the world, as the world contends with multiple crises, including the highest levels of conflict since the advent of the United Nations, several states are making deep cuts to their official development assistance, even though development is the best way to prevent crisis and maintain peace. And I think there is no other way to close the service delivery and accountability gap than by first closing the funding gap. And yet that gap continues to grow. And for instance, the operation of my mandate, supported by a multi-partner trust fund on conflict-related sexual violence, which urgently requires replenishment and a volume of resources equal to the scale and magnitude of the challenge, is in a dire situation. So I just want to end by saying that human dignity demands respect for the right to physical integrity, which is universal and non-negotiable. And as we work together to consign sexual violence to the past, we must continually strive to give all survivors a better, a brighter future through inclusive and intersectional approaches that leave no one behind.
Thank you, Ms. Patton. So much food for thought there. Thank you so much. And I'm going to bring in Madame Diop again. Could you tell us how you think regional organizations in the network can support action by member states on feminist approaches to climate insecurity, the COVID-19 response, and humanitarian crises in general?
Thank you again, Juliet, for this question. I think it's a time for us to expand 1325 on issues of climate change, but also the disaster like the COVID-19 that we have seen. And I think I mentioned our CRF, the Continental Result Framework, which we have those indicators, including climate, emerging issues, but we are reviewing progressively those indicators that are, as I said, friendly, but we need to make sure that we measure progress as well when we implementing 1325. And Africa right now, you can see we have more than 30 national action plan, more action it started 17 when I had my mandate, 17 countries. Now we have more than 30 countries in the continent. It means that 1325 is embedded right now in development, peace and security and development agenda of the continent. So we are taking it seriously. And again, it's implementation that we need to look at. You know, I like always to give a example of countries that are involving civil society. South Africa, for example, have the Gertrude Shope annual meeting where all of us gather, you know, South Africa, but also civil society, other actors are invited to share the experience and action and see what are the challenges that we are facing. So I think those are great examples on measuring progress where we see the challenge, not just within the country, but outside the country. Coming back to your specific question on the COVID, for example, what we did at African Union when we realized that, you know, the leaders, and South Africa was the chair of the African Union at that time, and taking great measure in terms of having platform for vaccine, having a platform where to access also those vaccines. It was a challenge for everybody, but we just say, let's organize ourselves as the continent. And Minister today, Mashego Dlamini, talk about how we organize online, bringing ministers of foreign affairs and female at the front, Minister of Gender, with the African Union member state to discuss really how do we put in place policy. So when we are looking into, and we adopted guidelines for gender responsive intervention to COVID-19 in Africa, which have been adopted by head of state, those guidelines, to say, you know, that it will serve as a framework for member states to draw on while they're designing their strategy for COVID-19 prevention and response. And I think if we do that in the same vein as climate or any emerging issues, to have those guidelines for member states to be able to include them, you know, when they are building such a platform. So you see the feminists, gender responsive, the feminists respond to those platforms by government. So our role for AU is to take the right policy, is to engage the different actors, but to make sure that they have the right guidelines when they are implementing, because at the end of the day, they are the one to be implementing those strategies themselves, those guidelines at the country, at local, at the local level. So lastly, maybe is for such a forum, you know, we are so delighted to meet even, you know, in Namibia today, here in Switzerland, to make sure that we exchange, because we need to look at the positive action. What are going on in each country, action by action, because we need, but measuring those actions and to say, what are the challenges that we face and how we can together, you know, work together on not just a bilateral, but making sure that we share those good practices and having the inter-regional cooperation. Today, the Secretary of State of Switzerland have also talked about the multilateralism process that we need to engage more and more within the Security Council, but also within programs that are addressing climate change for some countries that are left behind, that we are together on the same boat. You know, what is happening in Ukraine is impacting everywhere. What will happen in Africa will impact everywhere. So we need to rethink the issue of multilateralism. How do we be in solidarity together? And I think this is what this platform is trying to do, to say that let's look at the women, peace and security together and be in solidarity to one another. How do we do this peer and peer learning and review? And how do we support the women that are in crisis in Ukraine, but also in the east of Congo, in other places? It's one planet, it's one world, and we need to be together. And women should be the driving force for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madame Diop. Thank you. Women will be the driving force to rethink multilateralism. Indeed. Ambassador Guy-Spüler, I'm going to come back to you. Now, give us your perspective, perhaps, on how the Focal Points Network can support multi-stakeholder action to advance the implementation of the WPS agenda.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Juliet. And I would like really to thank you, Madam Special Envoy, for these very powerful and important words. And I will come back to some of the elements in your intervention. After I went through my notes, I tried to summarize the main points on how the Focal Point Network can support multi-stakeholder action to advance the implementation of the Women, Peace, Security commitments. And I came up with four keywords. One is inclusion. The second one is partnerships. The third one is cooperation. And the fourth one is learning. The Women, Peace, Security Focal Points Network has the advantage of being inclusive by design. It captures these diverse perspectives and vast experiences across regions and organizations which aim at advancing the Women, Peace, Security agenda. This corresponds to the idea that this is a team effort. It is through partnerships and cooperation that we can contribute to the agenda's implementation. I give you a concrete example. Towards the end of last year, Switzerland collaborated with Germany in undertaking a peer review of our respective national action plans. We are grateful to our German partners for the joint and open reflection, for sharing achievements as well as challenges and lessons learned with us. Notably, our discussions also benefited from the insights from German and Swiss civil society. The peer review also highlighted that the Women, Peace, Security agenda is fostering coherence across 4 of our federal departments, of our ministries, and thereby furthering a constructive interaction between foreign and domestic policy. So in other words, it also helps us to have more coherence internally in Switzerland, because obviously not only the foreign ministry is dealing with these issues. Furthermore, cooperation with civil society has a particular relevance for us. Switzerland puts a lot of emphasis on local peace building, as I underlined in my first intervention. The network amplifies such efforts. It enables member states to develop strong partnerships, not only with other states, but also with regional organizations and with civil society. Finally, let me reiterate how pleased we are to see such a strong participation at this 4th capital level meeting of the network. I encourage you all to make best use of our forthcoming discussions in the different groups and to put forward innovative and bold ideas. Let us use the space provided by this meeting to take a step back from our day-to-day business, to think outside the box, speak our mind, and hopefully return home with new resolve to jointly work towards a more effective, an even more effective implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in an international environment that is unfortunately, as we have underlined here on the panel, very difficult at this very stage. But this doesn't mean that we have to step back, but it's a call to action, more coordination, more partnership, and more learning together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Guy-Spüler. And thank you to all of our distinguished panelists. Thank you so much. That wraps up our high-level panel discussion for today. Now, many thanks to the panelists who shared their insights, and also to those who took the time to join us, including members of the press and those who joined us virtually. Now, we're going to divide into 3 working groups. For the participants joining virtually, please click on the links that you've received. For those of you here in this room, please go to your respective working group rooms as indicated on your agendas. Part 1 of the working group sessions will start at 11:30. So you've got a little break now to get to the right place. Thank you so much for your participation. Enjoy the rest of your morning. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée. Thank you.